I pinned my waistband. It's all ready to go. The pockets are pinned towards the front, and I'm going to go ahead and sew this all at 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then I'll go around and sew it again at 3/8 inch seam allowance. As I sew, I kind of want to stretch everything out because my waistband is a lot smaller than my pants. So if I stretch it out, it'll kind of make up that difference and help everything, like all the bubbles that you can see, kind of straighten out. If you can see that. So like bubbles right here are just going to straighten out as I hold it open. Pull it as I sew. It doesn't really matter where you start. I like to start kind of in the back somewhere just in case, but you won't really see. I'm going to line this up at 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then I'll sew all the way around. And after I sew at 5/8 inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew it at 3/8 inch seam allowance. But I'm going to stretch as I sew. I'll go around, pull out pins as I get close to them, back to the beginning and end. My threads back behind me as I sew. Something I like to do when I stop a lot to take pins out is just press this button right here. And when I do that, anytime I let off the foot pedal, like so, my needle will end in the down position. And I personally like that because that way I can make sure I'm not accidentally pulling my fabric and moving my seam or making a loop in my seam as I sew. So I'm going to do that, and I'll just stop every time I get close to a needle or a pin and pull it out. Again, as I sew, I'm going to just I grab a little section and I pull it tight so that no tucks are sewn in. I'm going to be careful around my seam allowance. I want this to stay pressed open. So I'll just kind of make sure that stays pressed open as I sew over it. And right there it's getting tucked, so I'm going to fix that again. Another reason that you might want to have the needle down button pressed, just if you ever have to stop and lift your presser foot, this way you can make sure you're not going to ruin your seam and make a tuck in it. Okay, and I have my pants around the arm of this machine here so I don't sew where I don't want to by accident. Now I'm getting to where the pocket is, and it's going to be a little thicker here, so I'm just going to be aware of that as I sew. And I'm going to pull really nice and tight because there's lots of layers here that I want to be flush with each other. Okay, over my pressure foot here. You can see there's kind of a tuck forming. If I need to, I can take that needle out a little bit early, that pin out a little early to avoid a tuck, which I think I will. I'm going to take that out and just pull nice and tight. Out. Okay, and I'll just keep going around. Lift that up to keep my seam allowance open. I've almost made it all the way around. Make sure my seam allowance is going the direction I want. Okay, I'm gonna just trim these threads before I sew over them so that they don't make a tangled mess. And this other one here, just trim those. And then I'm gonna sew right over the same seam and backstitch. Okay, now I can lift up my needle. I just have to press the same button again to lift it up. And then I've sewn over it one time. I'm going to sew over it again at 3/8 of a inch seam allowance. I'll get you started on that, but I'm not going to do the whole thing in the video because I just want to save some time and I don't want you to feel like you have to watch forever long video. So I'm gonna pull my threads back behind, and then I will line up at 3/8 inch seam allowance, which is a little different than normal. So we'll zoom in so you can see 3/8 is actually marked on my stitch plate. So this is 3/8, so that's 5/8 we already showed that. So we're gonna sew at 3/8, and we'll just sew back stitch to the beginning and sew all the way around at 3/8 inch seam allowance. So go ahead and sew all the way around, and then you're ready to move on to your next step.